So over these last days, the question has been asked many times, where are we when we no longer have to try to be this or that, or try to be here and now, etc., etc., etc. But we can now ask ourselves, what happens when we've answered this question? And we know that when we arrive at a destination, the first thing that we would do would be to explore our surroundings. And that's what we're going to do. Explore our surroundings. And to lead us into that, there's a story about how Aleph the wise became Latif the thief. Now, Aleph was wise because he'd been around the ridges, and he'd learned a lot of street smarts, and he smoked a bit of weed and tried psychedelics, so he knew the occult spheres, he knew dimensionality, and he'd had a couple of near-death experiences, so he knew the light and he knew oneness. So he had earned the honorific of being called Aleph the wise. But then one day in his travels, Aleph found himself in a place that was ruled by a cruel, sadistic and greedy despot. And of course, as is a way with beings of this kind, it had gone right through the population, so the whole population was dog eat dog, you know. Most of those who were honest had either left the country, been killed, or were in jail. So Aleph found himself staying at a guest house, a caravanserai, somewhere in this poor place, and he decided that, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, as the saying goes. So he thought to himself, well, you know, most of these people around here are thieving from one another, so I'm going to become a thief. But I'm not just going to be any kind of thief, I'm going to be a master thief. So that means, okay, I'm going to go for broke straight away. So he decided that he was going to rob this despot's coffers. He was going to go into his treasure house and he was going to clean it out. So using his wily ways, his street smarts and all the rest of that goes with it when it comes together, he managed to wheedle himself into the palace and managed to stay there overnight when the whole place was shut up, and he was able to make his way to the despot's bed chamber and hid behind the curtains until the despot had gone to sleep, and then he went over beside his bed because when he actually got into the coffers before doing this, he found that the coffers were empty. The treasure house didn't have anything in it because this despot didn't trust anyone at all, of course. He knew himself, so he knew the population. But anyway, Aleph used his wiles to get into the despot's bedroom, and when he was asleep he went over beside his bed and he started to stroke his brow. And as he was stroking his brow in his sleep, of course, the despot was smiling at this very nice feeling. And then Aleph said, "Where is the treasure? Where is the treasure?" But even in his sleep, this despot, of course, was a wily fellow and very distrustful of everyone. He said, "You think I'm going to tell you that?" So that night, Aleph wasn't successful in extracting the information that he wanted, so he waited until the next night. He did the same thing, and he kneeled by the despot's bed and stroking his brows. He used a different voice, and he said, "Someone has stolen your treasure." And the despot got very restless. He tossed and turned because obviously the words had gone in somewhere and caused some kind of anxiety in him. So the despot half woke up and shouted to his wife, who was in the next bedroom, is our treasure all right? And the wife, half sleepily, said, yes, it's safe under my bed where it's usually kept. So Eilif was able to go, and when he heard her snoring, to go and extract the treasure from under the bed. But of course, when the despot found that all his treasure had been stolen, he was right mad as a red bull, and he had everybody's house searched and almost trashed in the process of trying to find his treasure once again, but of course not successful. So he immediately thought, oh yes, of course, all of my populace is afraid of me, they wouldn't steal my goods, it must be a foreigner from out of town. So he sent all his soldiers out to search for foreigners in town, and of course, who should it be but Eilif, staying in his caravanserai, and of course was known to be a foreigner in town. So when the soldiers came for Eilif, and they wanted to drag him off to the palace to be beheaded, to find out, or tortured to see where the treasure was, because in the meantime Eilif had managed to find one honest man who had escaped from jail, who he gave the treasure to hold in a safe place. But then Eilif was taken to the palace, but on the way he was crying, but I'm just a visiting physician, I'm just a visiting doctor to help the population. But of course all of this was on deaf ears of the soldiers, and they hauled him in front of the despot, who when of course the soldiers told the despot that he was purporting to be a doctor, a physician, the despot said, well, prove what you are, otherwise your head gets lopped straight off. And Eilif, thinking again quickly, because he is a wise man after all, it comes out as we know, he said, well, I'll only prove this if I can choose my client. So the despot, yes, but prove it, otherwise off goes your head. So Eilif had already sussed out the place, as wise men do, and he said, I'll cure that blind man over there. And the despot said, oh, well, if you do that, you'll definitely prove yourself, because that's my son-in-law, and he's been blind for 20 years. And the despot was just about to call the blind man over to where Eilif was, when one of the advisors came over to the despot and whispered in his ear, but sire, remember, it's because your daughter is so ugly you had to marry her to a blind man. And the despot said, oh yes, I remember. Let this man go free. And that's how Eilif became Latif, the master thief. So in becoming familiar with our surroundings, in that place where we no longer have to try, where we know what it is when stillness and movement meet. Now it's time to explore these surroundings, because it begins to allow us to recognize what is it that is there for us in this place. Familiarization. What does that mean for us? For us, we're doing it with stories, but we know the stories are just depictions of life, with every character and archetype and symbol representing part of the psyche, the great and amazing hologram of life. But that's the story for today, and that's our introduction to the next phase, and that is an exploration into where we are when we no longer have to try. Thank you, thank you.